Welcome to Mirror Mirror, Reflections on Design at Chatsworth. In the exhibition this year, we've included 16 designers who've made works that respond to the spaces in the house and in the garden. These works also allow us to reflect on the history of design at Chatsworth. So the building as a design space, but also the furniture and other objects here that really allow us to tell the stories and history of Chatsworth. The painted hall is a room full of pattern in the painted decoration and the architecture and the incredible floor in black and white. In here we've introduced 2 benches by Joris Laarman, which are both tessellations of pattern that he creates in digital space. So he uses a computer to generate these designs, but then they're realised in wood. So there's this really interesting tension between quite traditional materials and crafts and the way in which they were conceived and the thought process that Joris went through to make them. Here in the grotto, we have 2 objects by Chris Shank, a cabinet and a mirror. Now, Chris makes this incredible surface using a process of assemblage of material and then coating that material in aluminium and resin to create this almost science fiction-like form. In the grotto, we thought this was really appropriate because nearby are objects from our mineral collection, which have a similar kind of quality. And also we've placed some minerals inside the cabinet just to show how an object like this might work. Also, the grotto is home to carvings by Samuel Watson. These carvings are themselves encrustations of shells, pearls and sea creatures. So having Chris's work here, the minerals and the carving all seem very appropriate in this grotto space. Here in the chapel corridor, we've placed 7 works by South African ceramicist Andile Deilvani. They're in the chapel corridor because we really wanted to reflect on some of the incredible materials and objects that have been assembled by the family over the centuries, including painting, sculpture, minerals, but also more recently, another suite of ceramics by Edmund de Waal called A Sounding Line that was a purpose-built piece for this space. So not only do Andile's works reflect on the longer history of collecting at Chatsworth, but some of the more recent additions as well. In Andile's work, there's lots to look at. There's lots of detail, including small pictograms, even eyes or fingers that you might recognise within some of the vessels. They also have a really strong connection to the land. Andile's heritage in South Africa really speaks through his ceramic work, as does more recent residencies in the UK. He was resident in Cornwall at the Leach Pottery. So I feel that in his work, he's bringing together lots of different traditions of ceramic making. Faye Toogood has made 3 pieces for the oak room. They are themselves made from oak, a table and 2 stools. The stools are made from bog oak, which is this very special preserved kind of oak that is found in bogs, and it creates a very hard, dense variety of the material. We're also surrounded here by oak panelling that was purchased by the 6th Duke of Devonshire for this space. And this room has had lots of different functions. Sometimes it connects to the chapel, which is next door, but also it's been used for more convivial things like games or supper or just a gathering. And it's that idea really that Faye has used to inspire this work, which is to create a table around which you can imagine gathering with others. For the chapel, Faye Toogood has made pieces in stone and in bronze. One of the things that Faye was responding to in this space is the stone itself, the stone of the altar and the floor in here. The other thing that Faye was responding to is the purpose of this space as a spiritual space. So these pieces also might resemble things that are familiar to us in a chapel or a church setting, an altar, a pew, a pulpit. But Faye also called these pieces standing stones. So they also have a deeper resonance with the idea of standing stones that you might find in a landscape, such as those that you might find in the Peak District landscape around us. These pieces are placed in the chapel and are intended to be very invitational. You're invited to walk amongst them and to think about this space and this space as a spiritual room within Chatsworth. Here in the Great Chamber, we have 7 works by Atori Sotsas. These are works in glass, so another material that we're adding to the array of materials in the exhibition. Glass in here responds brilliantly to the light that streams through the south-facing windows. And also the colour of this glass really shines and responds brilliantly to the painted ceiling above, which is also full of colour and movement. The scale of these pieces also is quite big and really responds to the collection of Delft pottery that we have in this space as well. The function of the Great Chamber is for the gathering of people. So we love to gather objects into this space as well to reflect the idea of assembling and assemblage in this space. Here in the green satin room, we have a series of pieces by Forma Fantasma. They're made of glass and copper and most significantly charcoal. Now, charcoal is a really interesting material in that it's often made from farmed woodland and then burnt, so it releases carbon and can be a pollutant. But also what's explored in this work is the idea that charcoal can also be part of purification in water filtration, for example. So it's a really interesting, thought-provoking work about the purpose and use of a material. And here it's very sculptural as well. Surrounding these works are landscapes of Chatsworth. So these paintings also remind us that the landscape here has always been and continues to be a functioning working space in which there are forestry and farming still continuing. In the State Drawing Room, we have this amazing collection of furniture, and in amongst it we've placed 2 chairs by Max Lamb from his 6x8 series. They're called the 6x8 series because they're made from pieces of wood that have a cross-section of 6x8 inches. And these chairs are made from a length of that timber that's cut without any wastage. So almost like a jigsaw puzzle, you could fit these chairs back together into their original form. Behind the chairs is a cabinet that's made from a repurposed set of wall panelling. So here we're looking at objects at Chatsworth that are remade and repurposed from previous iterations of their form. And then either side of the cabinet are 2 thrones. So here's an interesting thing. When does a chair become a throne? These 2 are definitely thrones. They were made by a woman, Catherine Naish, for George III and Queen Charlotte. Here in the State Music Room, we've introduced this piece by J. Young-Oh. It's a chair, but it's an assemblage of musical instruments that have been wrapped in a really fine leather cord to create this incredible form. The leather cord almost forms contours around the instruments and it has this incredible movement. So the instruments really make it clear why we've chosen to place it in the State Music Room. The walls of this room are also clad in leather, so there's that connection with material again. And then the other piece in this space is Jan van der Vaart's violin door from the 1720s. Now, this is one of the most celebrated works at Chatsworth. It's a trompe-l'oeil painting, so it's not a real violin. It's made to look as though it's hanging on the door. So that connection between this historic painting and J. Young-Oh's chair is really strong. 2 works by Fernando Lapos are situated in the State Bedchamber. There's a chair and a cabinet. Now, these pieces have an incredible appearance because they look fluffy and almost animal-like. The fibre is actually agave, which is a succulent, and this fibre is extracted from the leaves. The fibre itself is grown in Mexico in a village that has been particularly affected by climate change. And what Fernando has done there is try to create a new kind of growing situation and a new kind of way of the local people cultivating this material to really counter some of the effects that they have seen in the landscape. So putting these in the State Bedchamber is really appropriate because they are a cabinet and a chair, and they have this wonderful interaction with the textiles that are already in this room, the bed and the curtains, and I think look really appropriate to the function of this space. The State Closet traditionally would have been the gathering place of a very few people or for the quiet contemplation of portable artworks. And this is where we've chosen to place a series of vessels by Ndidi Akubia, who's based in Manchester. These works in silver are hammered, and so they have this incredible surface where you can see movement and the dynamic of the way in which she has worked the metal. These pieces also connect to a silver chandelier in this room, which we know dates from the late 1600s. The chandelier is very significant because we know that it celebrates the transition from the 4th Earl of Devonshire receiving the dukedom, so becoming the first Duke of Devonshire. So that really tells us part of the story of Chatsworth. But to have those objects connected across time through the materials that they're made from makes this really wonderful conversation between the present and the past. We're now in the Sabine room. This room has an incredible painted interior by James Thornhill, which was made in the early 1700s. And matching the soaring quality of this painted decoration is Joseph Walsh's Enignum bed. The bed is made from steam-bent ashwood, and like the room around it, it has this incredible soaring composition. Joseph was also commissioned to make a series of brackets for the South Sketch Gallery at Chatsworth. These brackets, which are arranged in pairs along that gallery, are very sculptural, but also perform a function in that they are shelves for other objects or ceramics. Here in the library, Michael Anastasiades has made an installation with light. So the pieces that he's made are themselves lights made with bamboo and very delicate fixings which hold the illuminated tubes. And the light that they give in the library is really golden. So that reflects on the space around us, the gilding in the ceiling, the gold in the book bindings, the metal elements in the shelves and in the architecture. So altogether it creates almost a complete installation and a real different way of seeing the library. In the vestibule between the Great Dining Room and the Sculpture Gallery, we've placed a chandelier by Inni Archibong. The chandelier is called Dark Vernus. Vernus means spring, and it's this incredible abstract exploration of colour and light. Inni's also made a sound piece to accompany this light, which is really appropriate to the space because in there is a musician's gallery, and so it is a space that was designed to hold sound. Inni's work is a reflection and celebration of Black history. Also in that space are 2 busts by Charles Cordier from the 1850s that show Black people. They're really beguiling because they are beautiful sculptures. They have a very complex history which is related to the time they were made when slavery had just been abolished in France. However, Inni's work really rises above that complexity and creates a really incredible installation in this space. The Sculpture Gallery is a real celebration of stone, but also of colour. It was made during the 6th Duke's time in the early 1800s for his collection of contemporary sculpture. And it's into this space that we've introduced 4 works by Samuel Ross. Samuel's work is in stone, but also in a really bright orange-coloured steel. So there's a real mixing there of very traditional materials, but also with this quite hard industrial material alongside it. What Samuel's work does in this space is really connect to some of the sculptures. We have 2 particularly interesting reclining figures in the Sculpture Gallery, and beyond them are 2 works that Samuel's made that are almost like chaise longue, onto which you can imagine these bodies reclining. Out in the garden, there are pieces by 3 designers. In the Rose Garden, a work by Najla Elzine is one of her seduction pairs. Now, these pieces have this really wonderful relationship with each other. They almost hug each other, and they invite you to become part of that sculpture by sitting on it. And it's arranged so that you can see along the axis of the garden, the symmetry of the garden reveals itself to you from this piece. Around the ring pond are 3 pieces by Wendell Castle in bronze. Wendell Castle thought of himself as much a sculptor as a designer, and these pieces are really interesting in terms of their form and relationship with the yew trees that you can find around the ring pond. And then Joris Laarman has made a piece called a symbio bench, meaning that it has a symbiotic relationship between the designed bench and the natural world around it. Into the surface of the stone, which is a local grit stone, he's channeled grooves into which moss has been planted. So it's almost as if part of the garden is meeting the bench in this complete symbiosis. So overall, this exhibition is a real conversation between what can be found at Chatsworth and new ideas, which include issues such as sustainability, the repurposing of materials, and a real connection to the idea of design today.